Hey there, happy Monday. It's really rare that I get to join you all on a Monday, so thanks so much for joining me today. And I have to thank a person in our community that reached out to me, particularly with interest in functional cognitive disorders, and said, hey, do you have a video on this? And I was like, I don't. So here we are talking about functional cognitive disorders. And I just recently got back into the literature because, one, this person had asked, but I'm working on the final touches of our Brain Bytes Mini Course. About every other month, we do a mini course with a deep dive into a topic. And this is differential diagnosis in neurologic disorders. One of my favorite things. It's what I teach at University of Southern California, and it's just one of those things that I love talking about. And this idea of screening for functional symptoms all along the spectrum. So in weakness, in sensory loss, in ataxia, in basal ganglia type symptoms, screening for the presence of functional symptoms within those areas is so important. That's really the hallmark of our mini course. And functional cognitive disorders or screening for functional cognitive dysfunction is a really big piece. If you have somebody who's presenting with memory changes, executive function, brain fog, difficulty making decisions or switching tasks and things like that, you would want to be able to screen not only for some sort of neurodegenerative disorder, but for a functional cognitive disorder, which can actually be quite common. So I'm excited to talk a little bit about it today and to share an article. So let me just pull up this article for you. It's a recent article just from last year. Oh, I hope I have it. Here it is. Functional cognitive disorders, clinical presentations and treatment approaches, written by two of the leaders in the world here on this. I actually had the great privilege to meet both of them, see them both talk at the Functional Neurologic Disorders Society meeting last summer. And Laura McWhirter, she actually did a phenomenal presentation on functional cognitive disorders that really helped me understand this more. So in this particular article, that's where I created the post for today. So let me pull this one up as well. I created this, a comparison and contrast of neurodegenerative disease versus functional cognitive disorder based on a table in the paper, this review article. So let me just go through some of these to help define it, and then also just give you some things to be thinking about as a therapist of how you might screen for, and then incorporate this into treatment, right? So a functional cognitive disorder, like a functional neurologic disorder, is not just a disorder of exclusion. There are some positive findings, and I'll go over some of these here. And there are also things, obviously, that are more consistent with neurodegenerative disease that you would rule out. Now, by the way, I am not a psychiatrist. I'm not a neuropsychiatrist. I'm not a neuropsychologist. And I don't even know if I introduced myself, but I am a neurologic physical therapist. And as physical therapists, we screen for these and refer, right? So I don't make the diagnosis, but I do screen. And I am really pride myself in my screening skills is what I'll say. So screening for these things is really, really important. And there are some key areas that help to differentiate functional cognitive disorder from a neurodegenerative disease. Now, one thing I will say, yes, I'm a physical therapist, but I've worked in neurodegenerative disease for the last 20 years. So I work with a lot of folks who have a neurodegenerative cognitive dysfunction. And Alan Carson, Laura McWhirter really did a nice job of comparing and contrasting these. So some of the things that come up are in the interview, right? So typically a person who has a neurodegenerative disease, when you're talking to them, like, tell me about your symptoms, they're going to be a very brief answer, lack a lot of detail and complexity. They might even repeat things without awareness. This is definitely something that I've seen. Versus, let's contrast that to a person with a functional cognitive disorder actually has a lot of details, a lot of complexity. And they've actually done a study here comparing the length and even number of words that a person might use to describe it. The person with a functional cognitive disorder actually speaks for a lot longer in response to a question to tell them about their symptoms, and will have many examples of lapses in symptoms occurring. So that's a really good contrast between the two. The second are just the symptoms themselves. So the person with the neurodegenerative disease might be unaware of the problems. It's oftentimes that their partner, the person they come with, is more aware of the problems. They might dismiss them or say, oh, it's just my age, or this could happen to anybody, versus the person with the functional cognitive disorder tends to have an episodic memory failure, which seems to be more a failure to encode the memory, which may be tied to attention, which we know is the main issue in functional neurologic disorders in general. Attention is the issue. So there also might be increased frequency of inattentive lapses, which can occur in normal life. And I want to show you a graph here in a moment of how often actually these inattentive lapses occur in normal life. When I saw this graph, I felt so much better about myself because I have a lot of inattentive lapses. So those are just a couple of ways the symptoms are different. And then testing, right? So we're so lucky. We have neuropsychology on our team to do some of this testing. Typically a person with a neurodegenerative disease with cognitive impairment consistently, by the way, like repeatedly performs below the norms and in a very specific pattern of a neurodegenerative disease, whereas a person with a functional cognitive disorder might have an inconsistent pattern. So again, this is that variability and inconsistency that we see overall in functional neurologic disorder. They may actually be high or above the norm in some of the testing, or they could be below the norm, particularly if the testing is distressing, which it absolutely can be for anybody. There also is a pattern of self-evaluation during the testing that you don't see in neurodegenerative disease. I found this so interesting. So I promised you I would share this table. And this is one that also Laura McWhirter had shared in her FNDS presentation. And this was cognitive lapses in healthy adults, young adults really. I think maybe college students, but average age was 23. So I think we can all breathe a sigh of relief that these happen a lot. So at least one a week, 55% of these folks found absent-mindedness or daydreaming during conversations. 56% had difficulty finding the right word. 50% forget why you have entered a room. This happens to me all of the time. 40% forget or misplace their phone. 21% rapidly forget essential parts of a personal or telephone conversation. And 28% forget whether you've locked the door or turned off an appliance. Yes. And 18% blocks of retrieval of well-known names, phone numbers, PIN codes, etc. And yeah, my friend, the neuro guy, already says, is commenting here, I feel better. Me too. So I already feel better. I'm well beyond 23 years old, and I've had these cognitive lapses. Now, I think why is this important in functional cognitive disorders, or just in general? I think for a lot of us, particularly if we have dementia or cognitive dysfunction in our families, it does run in my family. My great aunt just a couple of years ago died of Alzheimer's. but maybe we've seen it, or maybe we're surrounded by it because we're physical therapists and neurodegenerative disease. You might have these lapses, cognitive lapses, and start to actually become very concerned about them, right? Or maybe these happen after you've had a head injury, or you've had Parkinson's, or you've had a stroke, or some other thing that also affects your cognition. Well, these may happen, and you might become increasingly concerned that there is something wrong with your brain. And in some cases of a neurodegenerative disease, there is. But in other cases, these are normal lapses. And what we understand from functional cognitive disorders is that sometimes the attention to the lapse. So if you can imagine you're going about your day and you, like me, go into a room, you forgot what it was for, you go back, you do it again. I mean, I do it several times a day sometimes. That if you start attending to that, so taking your cognitive resources and attending to, wow, I forgot it. I forgot it again. How many times am I going to forget it? Oh, I forgot it again. And start taking note. You can imagine how much of your cognitive resources are actually taken up in attending to those lapses. And this is not, by the way, the only thing happening in functional cognitive disorders, but is one of the principles in trying to understand how could this occur, and particularly, and we're talking about this in our mini course a lot, how this can occur with another neurologic disorder. So what is common, what we do know, is that functional symptoms come alongside other disorders like Parkinson's. So a person with Parkinson's can actually develop functional cognitive disorder because of their cognitive symptoms and the additional attention to the change in cognition. I just think this is such an interesting window to the brain. Okay, so that was one piece. I want to share a little bit more from this study. So I want to go back to, I made kind of a smaller table version of this. By the way, if you're on our newsletter, I'll send out the article, a link to the article in our newsletter. You can join at reactiveeducation.com if you're a therapist. But I made a post today that was a shortened version of this really great table comparing and contrasting functional cognitive disorder with a neurodegenerative disease. I found this a really helpful part of the article. There were a few things that I really loved in this article. This one here, it kind of got cut off. Let me pull up a picture of it here so I can describe these circles since the tags got cut off. But essentially what they were talking about here is all folks that come to a memory clinic. And they get stratified on the basis of having a subjective cognitive decline. So that's the big circle. Some of those actually have a mild cognitive impairment, and then even a smaller circle of those have dementia. And what the red triangles represent is, this is a big area in all of science, looking for biomarkers suggesting the presence of a neurodegenerative disease. And so one of the things that they really propose in this review is positively identifying individuals with functional cognitive disorder based on positive clinical features will help stratify and look at risk for dementia. And here's the great thing. It responds really well to treatment. So I want to give one example here. Let me stop sharing this for a moment. And I will direct you to a video. I'll put it in the newsletter too. This was a video I did last year with a person who had a functional cognitive disorder. Her name is Max. She's a huge functional neurologic disorder advocate. So you should definitely watch this video. And again, it's not on Instagram. It was on Facebook. So I'll put a link in the newsletter this week. But Max shares a story to where she was diagnosed with a neurodegenerative disease, like totally incapacitated and not able to move, really poor speech and cognition, and in an assisted living. And it wasn't until she was enrolled in a clinical trial for this type of dementia that she had been diagnosed with that they found that she actually didn't have that, and it was a functional cognitive disorder. And once she had the treatment, which by the way, she really directed her treatment, once she had the treatment that was helpful, she got out of assisted living. She got out of a wheelchair. She could walk with a walker. She could, her speech was resolved. Her cognition was resolved. So this is the real promising piece. And the reason why we should be screening this is that some people may be misclassified as dementia when they might have a functional cognitive disorder, and it really should be screened. Okay, I got a couple other pieces that I wanted to share. And one was, this was another slide from Laura McWhorter from the FNDS Society presentation. And this great article too, so another great resource, I'll put it in our newsletter again, Functional Cognitive Disorder, Dementia's Blind Spot. And here's where they propose the diagnostic criteria. So, one or more symptoms of impaired cognitive function. Second, clinical evidence of internal inconsistency. And so this is what I was talking about in that table to kind of compare and contrast consistent findings on testing and consistent findings on the person's story and symptoms. By the way, the lack of consistency, I think this is so important. The lack of consistency is not that the person's making up the story. It's not that they are not remembering details correctly and are being inconsistent and they're lying or it's in their head. That is not what internal inconsistency means. So I think that's really important because I think there's a lot of stigma and there's a lot of misunderstanding around functional symptoms in general, that this inconsistency or variability in symptoms or episodic nature of it is that the person's hiding something or making it up. Absolutely 1,000% not true. This is not made up. This is an actual cognitive dysfunction when it's a functional cognitive disorder. And it's involuntary. The person does not have voluntary control over it. This is not their fault. So that's another really big piece. Sorry, little tangent there. But diagnostic criteria. So that positive diagnosis of the variability of it and so on, it's a positive diagnosis. It's not just a rule out diagnosis. Symptoms or deficit not better explained. So that is ruling out other things. And they cause a lot of distress or impairment in social or work roles or other important areas of function. So those are the proposed diagnostic criteria. Number 2, I think being the most important. And again, we see this in functional motor disorders, functional sensory disorders, functional coordination disorders, functional dystonia. All of these things ring true, like number 2, the inconsistency, the variability, the distractibility of it. So super, super helpful. I have one more piece to share here. So let me just bring this up. And, maybe I already... Let me bring up this one more time here. So this is where we started with the post today, which was screening for cognitive function, comparing, contrasting neurodegenerative disease from functional cognitive disorder. And again, this is just a shortened version of the table that is in this article, which is called Functional Cognitive Disorders. Let me get you the full title: Clinical Presentations and Treatment Approaches. So also, we don't have time for it today, but great ideas from a treatment approach standpoint in this article. I'll share all the articles and all the resources in our newsletter. If you're a healthcare provider, you can get on our newsletter. It comes out on Friday. You can join at reactiveeducation.com. If you are a person with a neurologic disorder, join at reactivept.com. And if you're in our Brain Bytes group, we are doing this on Thursday, advanced differential diagnosis in neurology, all new, updated course. I'm super excited about this. This is Thursday, 5 o'clock. So if you're in our Brain Bytes community, which by the way, if you don't know what that is, it's a community of healthcare providers really committed to supporting one another, learning, growing, in disorders like this. So we get together this Thursday for this mini course, and I'm super excited. And if you aren't in Brain Bytes and you're like, that sounds fun, which it is super fun, you can join our wait list. It's at reactiveeducation.com/Brain Bytes. We'll open our doors again in the spring, and would love to have you. So a lot of what I'm learning and doing here is related to all the teaching and education that we do here, that I do at USC. And I just love to bring little nuggets to you and share them with you all. So I just want to say thank you. Thanks for being here, for being interested in this, for advocating for functional neurologic disorders and more learning, more understanding in our healthcare community. I really appreciate you so much. I appreciate your great questions. So by the way, if you have questions, please send me a message, write in the comments here. I'd love to hear from you. And Nikia, thanks for being here. Thank you all for being here. And I hope you have a wonderful rest of the day. Thanks so much.